Good afternoon, family, and welcome back to another episode of where the Legal Meets the Cultural. Every Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We thank you for joining in, being a part of our show, and just really walking through this new reality that we're seeing. We started the show in the midst of COVID. We're still going, giving you the information from our legal experts each and every week that help you to navigate what we're seeing in the landscape, being educated and knowledgeable about what affects us culturally, and then giving you some great talking points for when you feel like you're doing a little bit of that sidewalk lawyering. So I'm Dr. Stacey N.C. Grant, the producer of the show, and today we have one of our experts with us, Royce Russell Esquire. Our other expert, Edward Pichardo Esquire, is on location today. So he is not with us live, but he sends his love. And we have a lot to cover today. Still another impactful and information jammed show. But before we get into all of that, of course, Mr. Russell wants to say hello. Over to you, Mr. Russell.
I just want to say hola, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to another segment where the information is free, the information is focused, and the information is for you. As you know, we always try to put a cultural spin on what we're talking about. And usually we're around the corner and down the block on issues that other people have not thought about, whether it's media outlets, whether it's issues that are going to confront us in the near future. And today is no different as we talk about immigration and what it means for the tri-state, in particular New York City, given that there is a race for mayor, as well as other races. So welcome to the show. I'm sure you enjoy it.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. So before we get started, we always pause for remembering anyone who has transitioned. And we have yet another ancestor that has moved on, and we wanted to acknowledge him. I did not hear this news, and Mr. Russell apprised me that we lost another movie icon, so to speak. For those who know, this is like an original. When you talk about the OG, Clarence Williams III.
Oh, without a question.
Yeah, who starred as Link on the Mod Squad. He was 81, and he has transitioned. So we definitely wanted to pause to announce that. I'm too young to know anything about this, but
That's right. That's okay. I'll fill in the gaps. For those who lived in an era where there was only 4 stations that you would really look at, maybe 5 at tops. I give it 6. Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 5, Channel 7, Channel 9, and Channel 11. So it was about in Channel 13, right? So you had 7 stations that you would look at. It was no such thing as cable, or you were too poor to have cable or any of those satellite dishes. You were probably a fan of the Mod Squad and Link in this Mod Squad. Now, you want to talk about era of law enforcement and talk about relationships of the community in regards to law enforcement. Link, to me, was one of the first African Americans that I can remember that was part of law enforcement. And he was, I guess the Mod Squad was like almost like not a vigilante, but they were like detectives, and they resolved issues and they worked with the law. But you couldn't tell that to Link. Link was above the law, as he was cool, fashionable, and always wore his dark glasses, the shades that you previously saw him have on in the other frame that we saw, where he resolved issues of criminality, and he didn't take any talk back. Now, this was a cooler, more sophisticated, progressive Mr. Tibbs, right? Now, I'm really going back. That was Sidney Poitier, who was the African American detective who appeared in an all-white town to resolve a murder or some type of criminal investigation. And he would say, "Let him know Mr. Tibbs is in town," right? And so Link advanced that like 12 times over in Mod Squad. And then he went on to appear, I believe, in New Jack City. He went to appear on several other shows where I think the original Bumpy Johnson, he appeared in that in the show, Hill Street Blues,
Miami Vice.
Yes.
Hill Street Blues. That's right. Where I know him from, being that I'm so young. So yeah.
and so he never lost his persona, right? We all know that certain actors and actresses have a certain persona that never leaves them. And some are good and some are bad, and some can't make a career of it, but Link always did. You would never, ever, ever test his manhood. He was always the coolest person in the room. He's always maintained that afro, never left from that afro, and always maintained those dark glasses. And quite frankly, at the early age of 81, still had some more life to live as far as I'm concerned, because I get closer and closer to 81 as every hour goes by. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
blessed to our ancestors. You know, Ed is very, very, very focused on that, and that's the cultural part of what we do. And in his absence, I stand on location to make sure that our ancestors get the moment of silence and respect that they need.
Absolutely. That was shocking to hear. At 81, rich, long life, but definitely I'm sure his family is missing him as well as his fans. So we wanted to acknowledge him. And just FYI, our President Biden apparently is planning to buy 500 million vaccines to donate to poor nations. So I thought that
You
was
know,
just
President Biden's doing a bit much now. He's all
it's
around the place. He's going on his first foreign tour, and he's stopping at Russia, and he's stopping at China. He's just stopping a whole bunch of places. You know, he's putting in
well, you
place to make
know.
sure that we're competitive with overseas and all these tax and tariffs. We got the George Floyd legislation that's still up in Congress. You know, being held up like like a brother walking down the street without ID. You know, I mean, we got all type of things going on, but more power to the brother B out there
Yeah,
doing his
you
thing.
know, at least we could see that foreign relations we hope are improving as a result. But right here in this nation, we are dealing with the constant issue of immigration, and understanding that very well. My family coming from Jamaica, West Indies, and knowing just how much of a hot button topic immigration always is. It's interesting that particularly here in New York State, Mr. Russell, you raised the fact that there's some discussion going on around immigration, and all of the mayoral candidates are being asked either publicly or privately what their stance is when it comes to immigration in New York City. And that is significant around the country because New York City is one of the trendsetters when it comes to policy, when it comes to looking at what's happening culturally. You take a lot of information from what you see happen in New York City and how that plays out in other parts of the country. So we have a very hot and heavy mayoral race in New York City, and there are a lot of issues on the table. We'll get to the one about immigrants being able to vote, but you have some very specific pieces of information to raise when it comes to immigration and what we should be paying attention to culturally, since for Black and brown people, quite a few of our family members have come to this country as immigrants.
Yeah, I would like for you to leave the article up for a bit because I think it's always good to put names and faces together. And there may come a time as we have this discussion, you might want to put a name with a face so all our viewers can understand who's who and what's what. And once again, on Speaking Legally, we want to cover national issues, local issues, tri-state issues, but we also want to do it with a spin of understanding culturalism comes first and the law goes side by side. One is not before the other, but side by side, so we can make our way through the confrontations, the legalities, what we need to know to be progressive in life and kind of do away with the myths and deal with the fact, not the fabrications of what is going on. So, for our viewers who don't know, I used to work for the Department of Justice and I used to work for the Immigration Services. And I did most of the criminal work and most of the training in the criminal area, training trial attorneys and litigating cases that had criminal spins to it. There are certain crimes that if you commit them as a legal permanent resident, you are automatically deported. That's the word that we use. And the definition of that is removed from the country, either a lifetime ban or a 5-year ban or a 10-year ban. Now, you can hear from the cadence of my voice, I started out fast and now I'm going slow. The reason why I'm going slow because I realize that one, this information is critical. Two, it is coming at you and it's important. And I want you to digest it slowly and clearly because there's a lot to be said. And so having that position as a senior trial attorney back in the day, let's just say, and teaching others and training others as to what crimes will have you deported and now they use the term removed from the United States, you learn that immigration is very, very important, not only to the nation as whole, but to New York City. And having left that government job and now practicing in private practice for over 20 something years, and helping people becoming citizens, helping people from being deported, helping people get their legal permanent residency cards, helping them get out of deportation and removal proceedings, you see how much immigrants contribute to New York City and how important it is for them to have the rights of citizens and be able to bring their family into the United States. Now, why is that all important? And why do we bring it up in reference to the candidates running for mayor in New York City? It is important because 3.1 million residents, or 3.1 million of the population, are immigrants in New York City. That's not a number to sneeze at. That's a lot of people. I mean, come on now, 3.1 million, that's a lot of people. And to my chagrin, and maybe I know we have a debate coming up, but just doing the research that I have done, digging into the details, most of the candidates that are running for mayor haven't really spoken to the issue of immigration. Their literature doesn't speak to the issue of immigration. And I'm going to defer to my notes because I had to take notes down in reference to being able to, one, digest the information I was receiving and making sure that you get it from a credible source. Now, I'm always going to use the word allegedly. It is my belief upon information, because those are just words that lawyers use to disclaim from any slander or defamation, because someone may not hold that position. But it's been written, as you can see in this article here, next mayor wants New York City to be even more of a sanctuary for illegal immigrants. Well, that's the title. But what are they putting in place? And what does their literature say? And so when we look at some of the candidates, let me slide to the left, we see words like token words is mentioned in one article, token words such as immigration, immigrants, or the immigration communities. Those words are rarely seen in candidates' pamphlets and information. And we know immigrants have issues with housing. Immigrants have issues with public safety. Immigrants have issues with just surviving. And they want to know, what is the path to become a legal permanent resident? What is the path to become a citizen? And so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 candidates. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are people of color, and then not mentioning immigration in their platform. So that means they're not speaking to 3.1 million people in this city. I think that's flawed. I think that's a mistake.
Well, I think I've heard one or two of them mention, but to your point, maybe not as detailed a plan on how they're going to address it. So this is interesting.
Well, there's one thing to mention, and there's another thing to have your material that is very vibrant and speaks to it with bold letters. And so, yes, when a microphone is put in front of you and you're asked the question, yes, you have to mention it. But are you really advocating? Are you really drawing those people into the conversation so you can ensure votes? And I would tell you that the answer is not a yes, not a resounding yes. There's a little bit of yes and no. And so when I look at my notes and I look at the candidates that speak other languages, not too many do. No other languages for Maya Wiley. No other languages for Raymond McGuire. No other languages for Sean Donovan, right? No mention of Eric Adams speaking another language. Is it critical? No. Is it important? I would say to a certain degree, to show and reflect that you are diverse, or at least you care. And so, that's a little data point. It may not hold a lot of weight. Look, I don't speak a second language, but I represent those of the Latino diaspora, those of the African diaspora, Guyanese, you name it. But when you're running for public office, it is something to look at. And so I say all this to say, well, what are immigrants really looking for? And I mentioned it just briefly. I mean, ultimately, they're looking to become citizens and they're looking to protect their family. They're looking to become legal permanent residents. That means obtaining a green card, which allow you to do a variety of things. They're looking for safety, making sure that they're not victims of hate crimes. They're looking to make sure that if they are victims of hate crimes, or they witness something that is of criminality and they come forward, or they help in an investigation in any level, whether it's a white collar crime or whether it's a criminal crime, that a crime of violence, that they are afforded the opportunity to be safe in the United States and not have the threat of being removed. They look forward to knowing that New York City is actually a sanctuary. We talked about it, and there's a lot to be said about it, but what are the positions of the candidates? What are their positions? Are they, and let's underline this, and let me say this really slow, underline it, get your pen and paper out for those who live in New York City. Are they in agreement with local law 228? And what does local law 228 states? It states it prohibits city agents from cooperating with ICE, Immigration and Custom Enforcement, or federal immigration agents. What does that mean? That means that if you are in a church and ICE agents come and raid that, New York City officers, local police will not help in that, because New York City is a sanctuary. Or they would invade a school. Once again, New York City would not help in that effort. They would protect you because you're a sanctuary city. We hear about this mostly in soup kitchens, going there to round up immigrants who might be in this country illegally. Once again, if New York City is a sanctuary, local law enforcement is not supposed to help based upon local law 228. And
so this local law 228, did you say it passed or it's being proposed?
No, it's already in effect.
Okay.
It's been in effect, but you don't hear any of the candidates mention it. Will they continue to support it? Right? Will they do away with it? Will they continue to give it the legs that it needs? Now, remember, it is a local law. It's a local law. So that means it only pertains to the 5 boroughs. So where do they stand on that? And the example of this, which we see, at least in my industry, and that you hear of mostly in the newspapers, are immigrants that are going to court. And police officers are standing in front of, and ICE officers, Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement officers, are meeting them at the doorstep. And they're being arrested. So therefore, they warrant. They don't make their court appearance. That is a warrant. Or the ICE agent is standing outside of the courtroom, waiting for the immigrant to leave the courtroom, and then that person is arrested. Or they're going to Rikers Island and they're interviewing people that are incarcerated to find out what their immigration status is, and then arrest them or detain them, or lodge a detainer. And what is a detainer? So here's a human bite, teachable moment.
Yeah, Kevin said, and I'll just repeat it again, that he's hoping that ICE won't be as bold as they were in the past.
Right. And what stops them from being bold? Local law 228, right? A local law. So what ICE agents would do is that they would go to Rikers Island. And if they won't physically take you into custody, they'll write what we call a detainer, which says that Rikers Island can't release you. Even when your criminal case is resolved, they are obligated to release you into the hands of ICE. So ICE can then deport you. If you are in a sanctuary city, like New York City, and you have local law 228, that is a law that's supposed to protect you. Now, you can't tell me that that's not an important piece of information that each one of these candidates should be speaking about. I mean, you can tell me, but I'm not going to listen to you.
I mean, it is important. I actually went to see if I could find anything that remotely touched on it for one or two of their websites. So maybe they're purposely not touching this and just talking about whether they should vote.
That's the critical thinking that we're bringing to the table, right? That's what we're saying matters. That's what we're saying that we should listen for. You know, you have Maya Wiley saying that she wants accountability. That's the new word that you see people using, accountability and transparency. But how is that defined in reference to immigrants? What does that mean? Is accountability meaning that we support local law 228? Are we going to be a sanctuary city, so therefore we support local law 228? And I'll take this a step further, right? There are some other programs that exist that we need to be mindful of. And once again, I'll look left to my notes because I drilled down, right? You have the New York Immigration Family Unity Program. I never heard of that program, I must admit. We've heard a lot of things in the news about folks being detained and the families being broken up and kids in different detention homes with COVID and how they're being treated. And we talk about the DREAM Act. But here in New York City, that project, the New York Immigration Family Unity Project, also known as NYIFUP, is a discretionary project. What do I mean by discretionary? It could be written in the budget. It could be taken out of the budget. What are these candidates saying to that program? But I don't stop there.
And the program, describe that program a little bit more for those who are trying to understand this, especially if you have family members who are in this population of immigrants.
So when you're detained, you might be here in the country legally. One family member might be here legally. You may have some other family members, children that come to the United States undocumented, or let's say you all come undocumented. You're not housed at the same facility. Somebody might be housed in Brooklyn. Somebody might be housed in, let's say, the Bronx. And let's say the parents have an advocate, volunteer or paid for, that's able to get them released. Well, then what happens to the children? How do the parents reconnect with the children? How do the parents then say, all right, I'm released. I have a path maybe to legal permanent residency, but my kid is still in a Bronx detention home or still in a Brooklyn detention home. Or matter of fact, I don't know where my kid is. Programs like this help to, as it says, New York Immigration Family Unity Project helps to unite the families together. So now let me go a step further, because some of the names really tell you what they're about. And so once again, folks, get your pen and papers out there, because if it's happening in New York, it is happening in New Jersey. If it's happening in New Jersey, it's happening in Connecticut. If it's happening in Connecticut, it's happening in Philadelphia. We just have the fortunes here in New York. For those that reside in New York, they're having an election in reference to candidates to become mayor. And that is something that we should speak about. So there is another program.
So before you do that, I want to thank Kevin. He said he's going to make sure he asks the candidates about 228 when he talks to them. That's how we get the word out on Speaking Legally. So continue, Mr. Russell.
Right. So there's another program called ICARE, ICARE. And what does that stand for? Immigration Children Advocacy Relief. Children Advocacy Relief. And what is that? That's defending against unaccompanied minor children. So you have children that come in the United States, parents send them here into the United States, and they are detained. Well, who's advocating for them? What program is advocating for them? Do the mayor, the candidate for mayor, do they support that program? Once again, we're talking about accountability and New York being a sanctuary city. We're talking about programs that are discretionary. We're talking about programs that affect the budget, but we're also talking about programs that affect 3.1 million immigrants in New York City. How is that not a topic? Is it that we claim New York City as a sanctuary? So that's that. That means we covered. The city is opening up. If it is opening up, that means the United States is opening up. If the United States is opening up, that means immigrants are coming and going. And we all know Black lives matter, brown lives matter, immigrant lives matter, and we're living in a diverse world where we need to really speak about that. I'll give you one more program called the IOI, Immigration Opportunity Initiative, and it provides defense for immigrants who are not detained, but who are facing deportation or removal. So let me go into a teachable moment. Here's one teachable moment. Sometimes you just cannot detain or have everyone in a facility. You just can't. So there are times where people that come here illegally are allowed to remain free. They may have an ankle bracelet, they may have the report, but they still have a case. And so, what programs that are discretionary, that might be in the city budget, that are helping those individuals? Now, I would tell you, as a private practitioner who financially I'm retained by immigrants, they work as hard as anybody else to make sure that their freedom is secured. And whether they have to give $5 a day, they'll do that to make sure that their freedom is secured. So if there are immigrants that are part of these programs, discretionary programs, it's because they do not have the financial wherewithal. And I'm just going to stop for a moment to repeat the programs again. It's the New York Immigration Family Unity Program, NYIFUP, and it advocates for detained immigrants or immigrants that are facing detention and making sure that their families are unified. Discretionary program, I-CARE, which is the Immigration Children Advocate Relief Program. Once again, it is a defense program that protects unaccompanied children, which we see happen so often in the United States and in New York City. The Immigration Opportunity Initiative, IOI, which provides defense for immigrants who are not detained, but who are facing deportation removal proceedings. Discretionary, right? And so this is important because we know, as much we mentioned Biden, so let's go full circle, right? We talk about Brother B. Brother B is out there in the world doing the things that he needs to do, right? As Vice President Harris is holding down the fort, right? And what is important and what is going to be on the floor after they pass the George Floyd Act, after we really come full circle on Black Lives Matter. So the next thing that's on the floor, and might be on the floor simultaneously, is reintroducing the DREAM Act, reintroducing the Citizen Act, reintroducing ways that people can become green card holders, legal permanent resident, reintroducing ways that they could become a citizen. Now, I mentioned a lot of things about the candidates and what they're not doing or what they should be mentioning, and some of the programs that are out there in New York City that we need to be aware of. And so I'll take a moment to reflect on the fact that there is some conversation, as you have shown earlier, about immigrants having the right to vote. I think that's a huge jump if you're not taking care of dotting the I's and crossing the T's. You're talking about voting. That to me appears to be a whole lot self-serving, right? Because we're talking about a time where votes matter and you're telling people that they should have the right to vote. But how about we have a right to public housing? Or how about you have the right to safety? How about you have a right to path to become a legal permanent resident? So when we talk about the right to vote, immigrants' right to vote, we know Eric Adams is in the forefront of that. And what he proposed is that if you're here and you're working legally, or you're a legal permanent resident, you should have the right to vote. Now, let's chew that for a second. Let me take a sip because it deserves a sip while we let that marinate. What is he actually saying? If you are working here in the United States legally, that means you did go through some process. Like, you can't get employment authorization, that's what we call it, when immigrants are allowed to work without going through a process. And let me explain further. This is where we really get into the law, right? So we talked about the cultural, now we're talking about the law. In order to work, you need to be accounted for in the United States. Legally, employment authorization card, which allows you to do some other things. How does that happen? That can happen when you come into the country. You could come in the country as what we call an H1 or H2. That means you're coming in with a job already in place for you. We see that in our institutions of higher education, Columbia, NYU, who hire folks to come in that are not in the country to work here in the United States. We see that with our IT companies, hire people from other countries to come in to work. We might see it in specialized areas, such as the NBA, the National Basketball Association. Look who got the MVP, y'all. It's called the Joker out of Denver. He's an international player who's come in. Luka Doncic for the Dallas Mavericks, international player, probably came in on a P1 or a P2 visa. Anyhow, those are individuals that are allowed to work in the United States. So if you take, and I'm not speaking for Eric Adams, I'm just taking a little bit of what I read from his proposal. If you take that as an example, if you're here to work and you've come through a legal process, then based upon his proposal, as I understand it, you should be able to vote. Now, some of the more affluent basketball, sports related folks, entertainer folks, they may stay here for a period of time. And then when this basketball season's over, they may go back to their home country. We see that. But those that do stay here, they should have a right to vote. So let's leave that and let's go to the common folks. Common folks, a guy like me, a girl like you, you know what I'm saying? Just regular old common, you know what I mean? We ain't rapping, we ain't doing nothing, just common. We got to look in our wallet before we get our doobie done, before I get a haircut. Just regular old folks, you know what I mean? That sleep with a net on at night and wear a do-rag, those folks, right? What is he saying about those folks? He's saying the same thing under his proposal. If you're able to get an employment authorization card, that means you're accountable in the system for immigration. And that means you have a path, a little bit of a path to become a legal permanent resident. And so let's just go back to the law and take another human bite. Well, how does that happen? And I'm just going to talk about one area because immigration is vast and we could talk all day. And then Dr. Grant, I'll let you comment on this, is that you could become a legal permanent resident by way of what we call a family petition. And what is a family petition? That means you have a loved one, a mother, a father, a sister, a brother, a spouse that is able to petition for you to reside in the United States based upon their legal status as either a legal permanent resident or a naturalized citizen. A legal permanent resident is a person that has a green card, went through the process themselves, or a naturalized citizen, a person who has a green card, been in the country, left with approval, came back with approval, and then over a period of 5 years has good moral conduct. That means no arrests, nothing that would deem them deem them ineligible for becoming a citizen, and they know the history of the city that they're in. Who's the mayor? Who's the president of the United States? Can write a sentence in English? Can read? And if they can't, then they can do it in Spanish, in their language. That person then becomes what we call a naturalized citizen and receives a certificate of their citizenship. They can sponsor you. So if you have this family petition, while your petition is being examined and processed, you would then have the ability to work by way of an employment authorization card. What the candidate Adams is saying is that if you have that card, obviously you went through a legal process.
Right.
And if you went through a legal process, then why not vote? Because you're on that path. That's heavy. And that's something we're looking at. And I don't know why he hasn't brought that up, because 3.1 million people are waiting to hear about that.
Right. Well, somebody in his camp I know is listening. And we're going to make sure that, we get these answers, because the answers are important. And I think that is a valid point, that if you do have those cards, that you went through a process, you're participating in the economy, you are, and I think Daryl mentioned that the hospitality industry, is where we see a lot of this. That's a great point, Daryl. And hey, Kevin, hey, Richard, thank you for always being here and tuning in. But we should look at that. Why not vote? I mean, I don't see anything wrong with that, at least having that opportunity to participate in the place where you're using your skill and talent and providing labor, that you should be able to vote for the people that can assist you on your path to citizenship.
And what's critical about this is that the naysayers will say, well, you're not a citizen of the United States. I do understand it. Don't get me wrong. I am processing this in real time. What is the downside, right? I mean, I really have to give it some study, having given it a whole lot of study, but I present the question to our audience, right? For them to think about, because that's what they should be thinking about when they look at the candidates that are running for mayor. I say, as I think about it right now, without getting into the weeds, I'm like you. If you're on the legal process to becoming a citizen, which you are, if you are being sponsored by a family member, or you are brought here, as Daryl says, part of the hospitality industry, hotels filled. Cooks, chefs, I forgot to mention that. Cooks and chefs are filled with immigrants coming in, and you're working hard, but you're working by way of the employment authorization card. I am not saying that you're working here illegally, and just because you pay your taxes, you should be able to vote. I'm not saying that, because you need to be accounted for, and that's critical. But if you are doing that, then why not? Why not be allowed?
Because that employee identification card, that says something. It should count for something. And
you're vested.
I'm doing it in real time with you, processing it. It seems feasible, plausible. So it's worth the how many million that are here.
Right.
That could shift an election if everyone is engaged. So we really,
the conversation should be had. I mean, part of what we're talking about today is that, hey guys, there's a void. You're not speaking to this. Hey, our listeners, you should be requesting this, i.e. Kevin, bringing it up. Hey, what is going to be the end result of this conversation? Let's have it. Let's become culturally informed. Let's become legally informed. Let's get engaged so we can find out what the answers are. And once again, I say that if you get the employment authorization card legally, then you're vested. And being a legal permanent resident, even though you're not a citizen, you're still vested in the city that you reside. One of the tenets and one of the restrictions of becoming a legal permanent resident is that you can't leave the country for more than 6 months.
Right.
More than 180 days. So, yes, I'm not a citizen, but my stakes are really, really high in the place that I work. Now, one could say that there's certain rights that need to be held just for citizens. I get that. Maybe that's another debate at another time. But right now, I think what he's proposing, not that he is the end all be all candidate, because I'm not advocating for one candidate or the other. This is not the place nor the show to do it. This is speaking legally with a culture and a legal meet. And that's what we're trying to do. Have a meet that it may not be a bad idea, or at least one that we should be proffering and asking of the candidates. Because remember, any debate, those questions are already in the queue. They're only going to ask about certain subject matters. Now, you may not know the question, but you do know the subject matter that they're going to ask. Mm-hmm. And I haven't seen it so far. I'll be on the lookout for it. And if you guys who are watching this show and listening to this show, you look for it, and let's have a conversation about it. I'm always open for some discussion about this critical situation.
And let's see, Kevin said also, it's very sad that many of these folks contribute to Social Security, but will never be able to get the benefits. Another good point.
Look, here's the Kevin point. If you're here illegally and you are working, then as Kevin says, you might pay your taxes. We don't get any Social Security benefits. But as to Kevin's point, if you're here legally and you're working, then you are contributing to Social Security. Social Security that I'm getting or will be getting or someone else will be getting, and you have no voice in the system. That seems a little jaded. That seems a little upside down. That seems like that should be corrected. And if we're not going to do it now, then the conversation should start at some point. And the question becomes, when does the conversation start? Why not now?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to understand, especially culturally. Like I said, there's so many of us in our communities that have come from all over the diaspora and that are here as immigrants. So, really understanding what can be done, what needs to shift. Just because it's been one way a long time, maybe it's time to open up to some other opportunities to really embrace their civic engagement, being involved in where they live, where they work. So, that's another show for another day to get into all of what we would need to weigh to see that. But at least knowing what's on the table, just like the police reform that is on the docket, and we pray that we see that happen. There's also immigration reform. So, there's a National Immigration Law Center that shares information about what's happening, what's being proposed, what the president is saying. So, find these things if it affects you, if it affects your family members, maybe even just people in your community, a nice neighbor that you're concerned about. Share with them information on how they can stay informed and let their voices be heard
And
at
one of
the
the
end of the
things,
day.
not to cut you off, but one of the things I want to make sure that we also speak about, and sometimes we don't like to time our shows, right? Because you want people to be able to watch them at any time, and but our information is forever flowing. So no matter when you watch it, no matter what I say, the information, unless the Lord change, is good information. We're in Pride Month now, right? And how does that affect immigration, right? New York City may believe in same sex, but does the federal government believe in such? Can you apply for benefits, a petition for a loved one that is of the same sex, right? The answer is yes. Although there's been case law in reference to the federal system that has really, really quantified and qualified it to make it almost seem like it's impossible. But if you live in a state that's a sanctuary city, that is something that you should try to do. What did the candidates say about that? I'm just providing food for thought. You know what I mean? I may not know all the answers, but we have the opportunity to question those. We're talking about immigration. I think it's important. It's important to know that, right? It's important to have an understanding of that. It's important to the families who have other family members that are here illegally, right? Or who are here trying to make their way. I may have a cousin or two who's trying to, right? I'm a citizen, so you should be speaking to me, and I think that void is something that we need to really, really speak out to.
There's a lot. And, in addition to the mayoral race, we have city council race, we have comptroller. There's a lot going on in New York City. I know this doesn't affect every one of you that are watching across the country, but there are other elections. We're always advocating on this show to be civically engaged. So you understand who you're putting in these seats, down to judges. That's on the ballot. There are propositions that are on the ballot. Even this ranked choice voting, we discussed and touched on that in a prior show, but that came up as a result of a proposition on the ballot that half of New Yorkers probably didn't pay attention to. So this is once again a reminder of how important it is to be aware. This is where the legal meets the cultural, where you can focus on what is happening around you, be knowledgeable of it, and sometimes it might affect you really close to home, and being able to have the legal experts that can address it, give you guidance and or food for thought. And that's exactly what this immigration conversation is about today. So,
And
any
you know
other
what? You know
questions?
what, Dr. Grant, you mentioned something that is critical. You talked about other races, right? And I focus on the race to become mayor. But in Manhattan, there's a race to become a district attorney, right? And
Mm,
one of the things that I slightly mentioned in this is, what are we doing for immigrants that are victimized, that are victims of criminal acts, and they're here illegally? Do they become a product of the deportation removal process? You have to understand that delivery people, right? I'm not stereotyping, but I believe it to be true. I've seen it to be true. I've read it to be true. Are immigrants that may be here illegally, and they get victimized all the time. They don't want to go forward and come forward to the law because they're ambivalent as to where law enforcement stands and what's the long term result of this. Will I show up to court one day and the person that assaulted me, my assailant, calls immigration,
Mm.
do I show up to court today and somebody's questioning me as I walk into the building? Where is my protection? Right? Are the candidates? I see there we have Alvin Bragg, Liz, was that Crotty? We have a bunch of people there that are running for district attorney. What are they saying about that? Are they speaking to it? And some of these people are people of color, and they talk about safety in our streets, but they're not talking about the particular immigrant. And I would tell you that if they did, I haven't heard it. And my opinion is that they won't, because when you talk about immigrants, it is a wild card. People are scared to use the word immigrant. They'll talk about safe streets. Don't get me wrong. And as I look down to you with the brow, they'll talk about safe streets. They'll talk about no hate crimes. I'll look down at you with the brow. But will they use the word immigrant? And I would tell you more often than not, they do not and will not. And that's a problem.
Mm.
And that's a major problem.
Interesting. And I'm looking at just some of the short bios from some of the individuals that are running. This is another crowded race. It's really going to be interesting to see how this turns out across New York City with ranked choice
Can you
voting.
stop? Can you stop right there? I'm sorry. You see. There's one Tali
Mhm.
Farhadin Weinstein, right, who came to New York from Iran as a child, is a professor of law, and most recently served as general counsel for the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. Previously, she worked as a federal prosecutor. 3.1 million people. You should be on the microphones speaking loud and proud about how you view victims of either hate crimes or how you view immigrants who are victimized and who's scared to come forward. If
Yeah,
I'm,
and
if
I
I'm
think I
lying, I'm
saw.
crying or dying, one or the other. Maybe I'm doing all.
Uh, well, I mean, we've put it out here. It's interesting to see what happens as we're on the countdown. June 12th, early voting begins. Countdown to the end of the month where we'll know with ranked choice voting where a lot of these new seats will lie. We really hope that everybody pays attention and you don't sit this one out. This is not a race to sit out, especially in New York City, because ranked choice voting has its own learning curve that people are understanding. And when you take that into consideration, when you take in normal voter turnout, what that looks like, I tell you, this race will be won within margins less than 100. That's my prediction. You heard it on Speaking Legally. So if you don't go and vote, there will be a real time effect that we see as a result of those who are like, I'm confused. I can't be bothered. I don't know about ranking. Make a decision. Even if you don't want to rank all five, rank your top person. And if you only have three that you really like, then rank the other two. But definitely exercise the right to vote. This is something that we still have as a tool to utilize when we talk about advocating for what we need in our communities until it changes into something else. This is one of the ways in which we can amplify our voices, come together, and effectuate change. So please, please, please. And if you know people who don't understand ranked choice voting, it's still very confusing to them, they're not sure, help them. Walk with them to the polls. Go over and have a conversation. Do a Zoom if you're not really up to being out and about like the rest of the world and the cities opening up. But it's critically important that issues like immigration, we address them with the candidates, issues around police reform, issues around housing, issues around education. There's just a lot of issues. So we need to make sure that whoever wins these coveted seats, particularly here in New York City, earn the right to do the work of the people, not just for politics, not just for photo ops, but to really help us recover from what we've experienced in 2020, now 2021, and who knows what's ahead of us in the future.
Right. And I think it's important that we understand that we are still in the COVID era, right?
Yep.
And there's skepticism and a whole lot of pessimistic viewpoints out there as to whether the vaccine works or doesn't work and whether it is a conspiracy or not. As we open up our minds to understanding that this might be a must play for us, we need to open up our minds in that when the world comes back and it opens in a big way, that immigration is going to be a major, major issue, because it's just not your local cities, it's the borders, it's traveling to and from. I think France just opened back up where people can now travel to France again. It is something that is intertwined in our daily lives. You can't talk about hate crimes and show it on TV and do all the media exposure that you're talking about, and not talk about the victim and that person's plight after you show their face 1,000,001 times on TV, or after they've been assaulted, and say, all right, you've been assaulted, we need for you to testify in court, but we don't know where your life stands. And after you're done here, you might be deported. That's real talk in real time, and that's really scary. That's a lot
It
of
is
real.
a whole lot of real. So we'll continue to bring this information to you where the legal meets the cultural. So we thank you for being here. John said he's back. We're glad you're back, John. Thank you for tuning in. We thank you, Richard. Let me give you all a round of applause for being here and being a part of the show. We appreciate all of you. And thank you for being engaging as well with asking your questions, giving your point of view. That's what we're here for, to provide the content, information, and the legal experts to help you navigate this interesting world that we see turning every single day. So make sure you mark your calendars. We're here 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're very welcome every Wednesday. So thank you for being a part of the show. Ed again sends his regards, and we'll be back next week, Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern, by the grace of God. Any final thoughts, Mr. Russell, before we sign off for the day?
Well, I want everybody to have their critical thinking hats on, because this is time to have it on, or put in their buds in their ears and turn it up to the highest volume. Read, listen, and read in between the lines, because it is the time to do so. Other than that, I want everybody to take care, be safe, and be well.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.